says Nellie Stone Johnson absolutely loved Buck Humphrey. And so do we. And so join me in showing your love for Buck Humphrey. Welcome to the Nellie Stone Johnson Scholarship.
Hold on. I want you to know there's a lot of labor in this room. There's a lot of exceptional labor in this room. But right here, this is exceptional labor. If everybody would do their job as hard as they do over at AFT and as hard as they do over at Education Minnesota, we would all be better. Thank you. Well, I don't know how to quite follow that other than to tell you, but she took most of her notes from a 2002 article where I was a little thinner. But I will tell you this, I do drive a Jeep, drive an American car, a Jeep, and a Ford, and I love it, and maybe I will star in some commercials someday. What a grand occasion. Isn't this awesome to be amongst all our friends, to honor one of our dear friends, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the friendship I was so lucky to have with Nellie Stone Johnson. It's terrific to see her family here. But so many of you called yourselves Nellie's family. I was lucky to be one of those who did too, and I do to this day, so I hope I haven't taken anything from your table, but I appreciate being able to sit at it once in a while. Thank you very much, and thanks to your family. Wow, Zena. Whew. She is going to change the world, isn't she? Isn't every one of those students up there going to change the world? Now, you talked a little bit about my early years in education, and as I told you when I asked for the Education Minnesota endorsement when I ran for Secretary of State, I'm one of the people in my family who's not a lawyer, I did tell the story of how education had not failed me in the public schools, I had failed it. That in 9th grade, my dad said, "Do you want to go to college?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I don't think you're going that way." And you're right. I spent my sophomore year, my junior year, and my high school year at Breck. To this day, I'm grateful for the teachers who touched me there, because while I may not have been the best student there, it certainly got me focused. And at least one divine moment in my life was when I met Heidi, then Shadow, now Heidi Humphrey, who is the love of my life for 27 years. It's kind of an interesting number. And the wife of my two great daughters, Alexis, we had another Alexis up here, and Sarah, who are 12 and 9. They all wanted to be here, but unfortunately had some other things going on. So I just appreciate being here. I want to thank Nancy Williams, and I of course want to thank Mr. Mitch Franklin and their team. They put on just a tremendous event. We all probably don't recognize how much it takes to put on an event like this. It'll start tomorrow. Their work probably started maybe a few weeks ago on next year's dinner. Putting this all together is a monumental task, but it's got to continue, and I know it'll grow. So thank you for all the work that you do. I'm honored and humbled to be speaking to such an important event with such a grand audience. You see, while we honor Nellie and her work by continuing her legacy with the Nellie Stone Johnson Scholarship, I also come here to talk about a true friend. I had heard of Nellie around my dinner table and growing up with my dad and grandpa and grandma, and a few stories about how she helped write the 1948 civil rights speech that was given that great day in Philadelphia so long ago. We all like to think my grandfather and Nellie were best buds. That's what you hear from everybody. But I'm here to tell you they weren't. They were true compatriots. They were colleagues who were destined to try to find an answer so that all of us could live free and without harm and in dignified lives, so that all of us men, women, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, immigrant, fourth generation, my great-grandparents were Norwegian immigrants, could have the same opportunities and the same, all of life's wants and wishes. Yes, they had a common agenda and common goals for a more diverse, fair, just, and above all, equal world. country and state. And I mean that because Nellie really focused on the state of Minnesota. Just today I read an article about how we're consolidating ethnic councils. Well, guess who started those councils? Nellie Stone Johnson and Hubert Humphrey and others like her.
Yeah.
We have them to thank for these great accolades. They did not always see eye to eye though, and one of the first stories Nellie ever told me when I met her as an adult in 1994 was a little scuffle that she and my grandfather had, a little disagreement about how the library board should function, and guess who won that argument? I'm here to tell you it wasn't Hubert Humphrey. In fact, they were both cut from the same cloth, usually smarter than their peers in the room, certainly excellent speakers, both sometimes stubborn as mules. I say mules, not elephants. And both full of life and passion and vigor and vinegar and everything else that I can't put superlatives on today. In fact, Nancy brought to my attention, and if you haven't read this awesome book, if you ever want to be inspired, or if you're ever down, or if you ever just don't think you make a difference, pick up this book. I want to read just a passage because I think it showed the relationship between my grandfather and Nellie so clear. She said in her book, "I do think rubbing elbows with the likes of me pushed Hubert Humphrey toward the great 1948 speech he had made on civil rights at the Democratic Convention." Remember, this was the minority plank that was going to do in the Democratic Party and Harry Truman, and it was all going to be said and done. How in the world would people like Hubert Humphrey really know about what civil rights was about, what I was about? You may understand the rights of all people, but you can't really feel how important those rights are unless you get to know different kinds of people. These were two people, and this is what I said at her memorial service, who worked at Friendship. They called you. You talked about being called in the middle of the night. I was fortunate to actually get one of those called too. And I look back now and I think I was so blessed because people like Nellie Stone Johnson never let a stone unturned. They never let you just kind of get along. They said, get up, do the work, it's hard work, it's not always the best. She would rub elbows with presidents and vice presidents and who knows, maybe even the Pope, and then she'd be licking stamps the next day to make sure that mailing got out to the union members. That's right. That's the kind of work we need. This was interesting because I haven't heard this much. She said they talked about how much Hubert talked, but they don't realize how much he listened. Listening is also key, and I've had to be humbled and learn that a little bit myself throughout my life. I now really know what it means when a 12-year-old tells you what to do. Hubert also was one of the first ones who wanted me to run. This is Nellie. Partly because she would be the first black elected to office in Minneapolis, which she was, and because I could speak for labor and equality and experience that I had. I told Hubert, quote, "It sounds good, but tell me what I really need to do to get elected." Believe it or not, I didn't know a lot about organizing a political race at that time. I knew about union work, about getting out the vote, but not running a whole race. My grandfather, Hubert, said, "No skeletons, being willing to run, and I guess read and write. That's all you need." So she took that as, well, I got all that down, I'm going to run for it all. And as you well know, Nellie was one of the first, I think the first, African-American woman to be elected to a major statewide body. She was on the library board. She was head of her union. This was a woman of supreme accomplishments, and she worked hard every single day. Nellie and my grandfather from the mid-1940s on were teammates of a sort. He working the halls of Congress in Washington while Nellie minded the Minneapolis and Minnesota fences. Both of them championing the cause of civil rights and the freedom and dignities of others. Nellie was a great labor leader and organized several unions and was fired from the Minneapolis, I think, athletic club, if I'm not mistaken, for her insurrection, as it were. She then went on to organize all those workers, and we are all thankful for that. Nellie, she also was on the Minneapolis board, as I said. Nellie was the first prominent African-American woman labor leader, civil rights leader, and education leader of Minnesota in the 20th century. Nellie was there in the 1948 speech, for the 1948 speech when my grandfather gave it. But she didn't just say, "Oh, great speech, Hubert," is my understanding. She said, "Now what are we doing? Now where are we going? How are we going to get that next accomplishment?" Some say that speech was the catalyst that started the landslide of civil rights legislation that my grandfather and Nellie worked so hard. The 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act are the paramount examples of what they accomplished. They went on beyond that and did similar things here in Minnesota and across the country, all the while Nellie working at her tailor shop and doing the hard work that she had to do to put food on the table and make sure her family was provided for. What you need to know is that while these federal protections that I talk about were great, it was hard work for people like Nellie, who made them a reality in our local communities and government. She was the person on the front lines in Minnesota, carrying the torch of civil rights, workers' rights, and basic human dignity for all. So when you deserving recipients that we had up here earlier accept your award, feel a little weight, feel a little push, maybe a little kick in the butt, maybe a little oomph, a little get me up, because you do need to go out every single day and do what Nellie promised. Make it a better world for all of us. You know, someone once said, "We all do better when we all do better." That's what Nellie Stone Johnson was about. That's what our labor unions are about. That's what we need to remember when people start to criticize common sense policies like minimum wage. They need to remember when we're talking about preschool education all the way on up to post-secondary education. This is what builds our community. This is what builds our state, and this is what makes America the greatest place on earth to live. Earlier in my talk, I told you that Nellie was a friend of mine. To tell you the truth, I had heard about her, I said, but I met her in 1994 when I came back from American University and working for then Secretary Mike Espy at the Department of Agriculture. Nellie until 1994. Nellie, as was the same as my grandfather, was always a teacher at her core. Both her parents were teachers. Many folks in the room are teachers. She taught many of us how to do the work of activism, how to make a difference, and how to empower others to do the same. Not only was I fortunate to call Nellie a friend, and as you heard, she showed up for my 30th birthday, and I'll never forget, she was just kind of over in the corner. I don't know if I think Nancy was there and a few others, having her beer. It's kind of, she reminds me a lot of my grandmother Muriel. The last time I ever saw her, I think she was having a Bud Light and a cheeseburger. They were both these very, very tenacious, put your nose to the grindstone, but rewarding people. And I think a lot about them both. If you haven't seen it, I know it's probably a little passé, and I hate to quote city pages, but I think they got some of the essence of Nellie right. They said, next time you feel a winning mood coming on, politics is corrupt, cynicism is abound, the schools suck, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, and I don't feel so hot either, skip the Prozac and go instead for a dose of Nellie Stone Johnson. 95 years old and getting sharper every day. I met her when she was, I think, 92. Nellie doesn't so much restore your faith in humanity as she demands it. Those hands, you know, you see these hands out there. I'll never forget, and I was talking to her niece earlier today, and she'd always grab you with those hands and say, now come on. But I think those hands went across the globe. I think wherever Nellie was, those hands just touched you and reached out and grabbed you. And so as I leave here tonight, and you know, they used to say, the old man, the only thing between a Humphrey speech is breakfast. I'm going to end on this note. I just appreciate being here. I appreciate that we have the world we do, that we live in a state that is so fortunate that people come from around the world to get educated, to be a part of our experiment, to be a part of our community from all over the world, whether it was my great-grandparents from Norway or our new countrymen and women from Somalia, the shores of East St. Paul, the fields of greater Minnesota, the work of the Iron Range, or the great Mississippi that combines the two great cities of the Twin Cities. We have Nellie Stone Johnson to thank. We have a legacy to continue. Thank you, and I appreciate all the work you do. Thank you very much.